So Canada just pulled off an economic magic trick that has the banks scratching their heads. We were supposed to crawl in at 0.5% growth for the third quarter, and instead we're coming roaring in at 2.6, 5 times higher. Now that's not a miss, that's a complete faceplant for the forecasting world.
Yeah, you could almost hear the Bank of Canada mutter, "Well, that's not what we predicted," while trying to sip their coffee like nothing happened. But here's the good news. We avoided a technical recession. After that brutal 1.8% contraction in Q2 thanks to Trump's tariff wars, everyone thought we were sinking. But we're not.
Instead, actually, here we are. We're not booming, we're not partying, but we're alive. And before we get into how we did it, I wanted to ask you guys watching at home, do you feel this growth in your own wallet? Do you see it at the grocery store, or is it just numbers on a page?
That's a great question. Let us know in the comments. Are you seeing the rebound, or are you still in survival mode? Because honestly, the reason that we grew just might surprise you.
Exactly. And the big driver was, drumroll, we basically bought less stuff. Imports dropped, exports nudged up a bit, and when you do import less, the math makes your GDP look stronger. It's like saying, I got healthier this week because I stopped eating 6 donuts a day. Sure, technically, but it's not a new lifestyle.
And then you add the fact that government spending shot up, especially defense spending, and suddenly the numbers look quite decent. Ottawa's buying a lot of weapon systems right now. 82% more, which is wild. Mark Carney wasn't kidding when he said Canada's military gear was getting older than our Maple Leafs jokes.
Residential investment picked up a bit too. Not new home builds, those are still pretty sluggish, but people finally started buying and selling houses again. Probably because mortgage rates came down a touch and everyone suddenly remembered that, they're allowed to move.
But we have to be real here. Underneath that's a shiny number, but the engine is coughing. The household spending is down. Business investment is flat, and people are saving more because they're nervous. The early numbers for October are already pointing down. Now, we don't know where that whole quarter is going to land, but if October is any indication, that rebound may not carry too far.
And that's true. Q3 gave us a surprise win, but Q4 is still a mystery box. Could be fine, could be rocky, and nobody's making predictions right now. But if October is the tone setter, then this rebound might be shorter than anyone even hoped.
Yeah, it's like the economy is trying to get out of bed but keeps hitting snooze. You get that one burst of energy from Q3, and then October taps you on the shoulder and says, "Not so fast, buddy." But here is the important part. Canada is at least responding with actual policy. Rate cuts when needed, stabilization measures, long-term planning, building out new trade relationships. You might roll your eyes at all of that, but you can actually see that there's a strategy on the table.
Now, compare that to what's happening in the US right now, and I almost don't even know where to start because it's one of the most dramatic, sweeping immigration crackdowns we have seen in years. And it all started from one horrific shooting in Washington, D.C.
A National Guard member, Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, just 20 years old, lost her life in an ambush near a subway station in Washington, D.C. Another young guardsman is still fighting for his life. It's heartbreaking, and there's no political angle in a moment like this. It's just about grief for the families and the people who served alongside them. And that's exactly why what a leader chooses to do matters so much in this moment.
And what did Trump do? Well, he chose a path that had nothing to do with helping anyone heal. He did as he usually does. He went straight for his phone. No pause, no briefing, no facts. He didn't even wait for the investigators to finish their first press conference. He immediately declared that the U.S. needs reverse migration, and then he said he wants to permanently pause migration from all third world countries.
Which tells millions of people who have lived in the U.S. for years, who work, who pay taxes, who raise families, that you're suddenly on the wrong side of the line. And he didn't stop there. He added this idea that the government should deport anyone who isn't what he considers a net asset, or who doesn't match his personal version of Western culture. It's power being used to single out entire communities.
And it's important to be clear about what's happening because he's not reacting, he's using the moment. This is the same agenda he hinted at all year, and now he's treating a tragedy as his green light. That's the part that really hits you. If this were a measured response to a threat, that would be one thing. But this is about seizing an opportunity to push something that he already wanted.
And the machinery kicked in fast. USCIS froze all Afghan immigration processing. Everything, even people who spent years risking their lives alongside American forces. Then they moved to reopen every single asylum case approved under Joe Biden. More than 200,000 people who already went through the most intense vetting process that the U.S. does.
Afghan allies are some of the most heavily vetted groups on Earth. These are people who risk their lives for U.S. forces. But Trump saw one awful crime and built an entire political opportunity out of it.
And then he widened it even again. Green card holders from 19 different countries suddenly have to worry about their status being re-examined. These aren't random visitors. These are people who have jobs, mortgages, businesses, kids in school. They did everything by the book, but now the book is being rewritten under their feet.
And while all this is happening, Trump drops the refugee cap to 7,500, the lowest in modern U.S. history, and says that the priority will be white South Africans. He can dress it up however he wants, but that tells you what this is really about.
And the impact is huge because lowering the cap doesn't just affect future arrivals, it chokes off the entire system. It slows family reunification, it traps people in war zones longer, and it signals to every agency involved that compassion is no longer part of the job.
And here's where Canada comes back into the picture. We live right next door to this. We share the world's longest border with a president who is using fear as a governing tool. And when you live beside that, you don't get to ignore it. Because every shift he makes on immigration, on trade, on security, eventually comes crashing into our economy, our politics, and our communities.
We can't pretend this is happening on the other side of the planet. This is right below us. This is the country we trade with. The one we used to travel to, we share family with. And when their leaders decide the answer to every crisis is to go after an entire population, that instability doesn't stay contained. It spills over. It always does. And that's the difference between our two countries right now. Canada gets hit with tariffs, our exports slump, our GDP contracts in Q2, but our government responds by trying to stabilize the ship, rate cuts, investment, long-term planning, and uniting.
Meanwhile, Trump gets hit with a tragedy and immediately decides that the answer is to go after millions of immigrants who had nothing to do with it. Entire communities instantly getting treated like suspects.
Canada is trying to fix problems. The U.S. president is trying to use problems to cause problems. And that tells you everything about where each country is headed economically and socially. One country is adapting, the other is spiraling.
Take this week, for example. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith have signed a historic MOU. And for anyone who has followed Canadian politics for the last 10 years, that is a massive shift.
It really is. For years, the conversation between Ottawa and Alberta has been shouting matches and threats of separation. But this week, they sat down, they shook hands, they compromised.
Here's the deal on the table. A historic memorandum of understanding is on the table, agreeing to discuss lifting the tanker ban and building a new corridor to the coast.
They're talking about a pipeline again, but talking is the key word. Carney hasn't approved a pipeline, and no shovels are hitting the ground tomorrow. But the MOU says they will collaborate to look at a new corridor to the Pacific coast.
And that is the Asia pivot we've been hearing about. With Trump putting up tariff walls, Carney and Smith both realized that we can't rely on the U.S. for everything. We need to get our energy to Asian markets to survive.
It's a pragmatic move. It keeps Alberta in the fold. It effectively kills the separation talk. Yay! And it unifies the country's economic strategy against the threat from the South.
Now, not everyone is happy about it. Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Culture and former Environment Minister, resigned from cabinet on Friday. He just couldn't get on board with the compromise.
And that's fair. For an activist like Guilbeault, even talking about a new pipeline is a red line. But for the rest of the country, it's bringing a unity that is needed at this moment in time.
And here is where the rubber meets the road, because you can sign all the papers you want in Calgary, but eventually that pipeline has to cross the mountains into British Columbia. And that's where the real story is.
And the reaction from BC was loud. The coastal First Nations and the Haida Nations immediately came out with a hard no. Marilyn Slett, the president of the coastal First Nations, basically said, Don't bother. The answer is still no, and we will use every tool in the toolbox to stop it.
And BC Premier David Eby called the whole thing an energy vampire. He said this project is just sucking time and resources away from real shovel-ready products. He called it a distraction.
But despite the shouting, there is actually a dialogue happening for the first time in years. The MOU isn't just about bulldozers, it puts Indigenous co-ownership on the table. So Carney has effectively forced a conversation. Instead of just ignoring the issue, he has put an offer on the table. We will build this, but we want you to own a piece of it. It's a wedge for sure, but it's also the first time in a decade that all sides are actually looking at a map together, even if they're glaring at each other across the table.
And in politics, an angry negotiation is better than silence. We need to get everyone on board. BC, the First Nations, Alberta, and the feds. It's a long shot, but at least the phone lines are finally open.
It's a start, but while we continue to make progress and unite to protect our economy, we have to remain vigilant because the instability we are seeing down south isn't just staying down south. It's easy to look at Trump's migration ban and say, wow, the US is really going off the rails.
And it's easy to feel superior. But if you think that rhetoric stops at the border, you are paying attention. The Great Regression isn't just an American movie. The script is already being read in Ottawa.
Exactly. While most politicians are coming together, look at Jamil Javani. He isn't just a backbench MP either. He's the ideological future of the Conservative Party. And what has he been doing while Trump attacks the Third World? Well, he's been running his Restore the North tour, which is a direct copy of the American Turning Point USA strategy.
And listen to the language. Trump talks about migrants poisoning the system. Giovanni is out there railing against liberal racism and attacking citizenship laws, saying that the liberals are handing out citizenship like candy. It's the same dilution theory, just polite enough for Canadian TV.
And then there's Pierre Poilievre, who knows exactly what he's doing. He may not say third world, and he doesn't use the slurs that Trump used on Thanksgiving, but look at the policy. He's pushing for the immediate deportation of non-citizen offenders. He's framing immigration not as an economic engine, but as a security threat.
It's the soft version of Trump's hard ban. Trump pauses visas for 19 countries. Poilievre talks about shutting down the system to stop the chaos. The target is different, but the feeling they are selling is identical.
So here's the warning. Do not let the Trump shock distract you from the Poilievre shift. Jamil Javani is best friends with J.D. Vance. They talk, they share notes. The playbook being used in Washington to dismantle the woke state is the exact same one being prepped for Ottawa.
And if you don't want reverse migration to become a Canadian talking point, you have to call it out now, because by the time the election ads start running, the regression will already be here.
We're watching the border, everyone, but maybe we should be watching our own House of Commons just as closely.
So that's the split screen, everybody. Canada is adapting and the US is spiraling. These are the moments where countries define themselves. And if you want to wear your politics on your sleeve or on your chest, literally, don't forget to check out our shop. We have a Black Friday sale going on right now, which means you can get 15% off everything in the store all weekend long. And if you want deep dives where we go way deeper, make sure to check out our Substack. We have a sale running on there for 1-year memberships as well. So get it before the weekend is out.
And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs a wake up on what's happening in this world. See you tomorrow, everyone.
Thanks for watching.